Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Relu and I'm the Director of Strategies for Grantmakers for Education. On behalf of our whole team here at GFE, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend our webinar today. This is the final webinar in a series on the Common Core that we put on in collaboration with our generous partners, the Common Core Funders Working Group and the Education Funders Strategy Group. We also appreciate the expert support provided by Education First on these webinars. Today's webinar is on pairing the promise of new standards with better tests, what funders should anticipate. I hope all of you will consider joining us next month in Kenton County, Kentucky, under 15 minutes from the Cincinnati International Airport, where we will take a close look at Kentucky's implementation of the Common Core, meeting with leaders, practitioners, and students. We will also dive into the political landscape of the standards and look at strategic communication efforts and lessons learned from philanthropic investments. The program will take place September 17th through 18th, and you can register through our website at edfunders.org. With general announcements out of the way, it is my sincere honor to introduce our moderator today, Joanne Weiss. Joanne is the former Chief of Staff to U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan and Director of the Federal Race to the Top program. She is an independent consultant to organizations on education programs, technologies, and policy. For the past 15 years, she has focused on driving system-level education change through high-impact grant-making, investing, and policy-making. We are thrilled to have her here with us today. I do want to preview that she will be moderating a Q&A toward the end of the call, although we do encourage you to please submit questions along the way through the chat function you see on the left-hand side of your screen. And we will do something a little unprecedented today, about 5 to 10 minutes, with about 5 to 10 minutes remaining in the call. We're going to actually unmute all of you. We just ask that since we have so many folks on the call, if you will please mute yourself when you're not talking to mitigate background noise, we would really appreciate it. But we hope to be able to engage all of you in conversation. So with that, thanks so much, and I'll turn things over to Joanne.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're really glad that you've joined us today. We've got some great folks who are leading the assessment consortia here to talk directly with you. So I am going to make the intro at the front short so that we can get to the main event. I just want to give you a quick 2 seconds on the Common Core Funders Working Group, which, as I think all of you know, is a learning network that's co-sponsored by Grantmakers for Education and is designed to help funders who are committed to the success of the Common Core to figure out how to navigate the field and really match their resources to the areas that have the greatest need and opportunities. And certainly assessments, as you will hear, is one of the areas that is going to be a very hot area over the coming couple of years, and I think we would love to get greater philanthropic engagement in this. As Lisa said, this is the third in our series. We also have a newsletter. The Common Core Funders Working Group has a newsletter as well as other events, so there's a bunch of ways to stay in touch. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce you to Bill Porter. If anybody has any questions, they can certainly direct them to Bill as a way of making sure that you're looped into everything and stay in touch with this work that's going on. So let me just give you a quick overview of what we're hoping to accomplish today. What we want to do today is help all of you get a more sophisticated understanding of what's happening with these next generation assessments. As you probably know, if you have picked up a newspaper at all, there's political and communications challenges galore. We also hope that with your help, we can turn some of these into opportunities galore. And PARCC and Smarter Balanced, as the two funded consortia working with states across the country to develop assessments that are aligned to the Common Core, are right in the center of all of this work. We also want to help make sure that you understand different ways that you can engage in this work in the 2014-15 school year in particular, because this is the year that we're out of field test mode and transitioning to full-on delivery of the assessments in this school year, and results will come back to students. And so this is the first full operational year, and there are going to be a lot of demands placed on local districts and school communities that we know that you in different localities might be able to help support. And hopefully it will also tee up some of the larger considerations for you about why and how philanthropy can support local schools and districts as they're thinking through their implementation of the next generation assessments and how to use the assessment data to really drive improvement in practice, in teaching practice in classrooms. So with that, let me give you a quick overview of our agenda for today. We have sort of 4 sections to the discussion today. First, Bill Porter, who's a partner at Education First and is also helping to run the High Quality Assessment Project and the Common Core Funders Working Group, is going to give you just an overview of the landscape, what states are in, what states are out, and how all of that is shaking down. Then Laura Slover, who is the CEO of PARCC, is going to talk to you about the PARCC Consortium, and Jackie King, who's the Director of Higher Education Collaboration for the Smarter Balanced Consortium, is going to give you an overview of Smarter Balanced. And as Lisa said, we're going to end with some Q&A. You are welcome, just to reiterate what Lisa said, to type things in the chat window anytime, and I will be monitoring that. And when we've got a moment, I will ask those questions of the different presenters. And then at the end, you can submit your questions by chat, or when we get closer to that, we'll tell you how you can actually engage in a real voice-to-voice conversation with folks and ask your questions that way. So with that, let me turn it over to Bill Porter to take us through a brief primer of the assessment landscape. Bill?
Great. Thanks, Joanne, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Just building on Joanne's observations, really excited to be here, and on behalf of the Common Core Funders Working Group, we really appreciate our partnership with Grantmakers for Education, and I think speaking on behalf of both organizations, are delighted to have so many of you on the phone this morning with us. As Joanne said, the main event today is really a conversation with Laura Slover and Jackie King and Joanne to learn more about what these 2 assessment consortia have been up to, what to expect next year when they really go live and many more students are taking these newer assessments, and ways that you as funders can help your communities prepare with that transition to succeed. And we'll be getting to that conversation shortly, but recognizing we're convening all of you at the end of summer, where people have been in and out for vacations and maybe leaving work early occasionally and maybe not always reading the newspaper every day, we wanted to start with a short primer about high-quality assessments, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. I just wanted to note here, I'm going to go through about 6 or 7 slides. I'm going to go through very quickly. We will be sharing all of my slides plus the slides that Laura and Jackie will be presenting after this phone call. So you'll have all of that available for you afterwards. So if you see something here you want to go back to, just know you'll be getting the slides. Of course, we can certainly talk some more about any questions you have towards the end of this webinar, or feel free to follow up with any of us afterwards. So one reason we're having this conversation about high quality assessments is because in many states, nearly every state actually, we have high quality standards. The Common Core standards were really an effort by states to develop some common expectations. They're benchmarked to what kids around the world are learning, and they represent what employers and colleges have been saying about what kids need to learn to be successful after high school. And as the green shows here on this map, virtually every state in the country is really committed to using the Common Core and having the Common Core standards be embedded in their classrooms. Now, despite a lot of sound and fury over the last couple of months, where if you read the New York Times or maybe your local newspaper, you'd think that every state was sort of going back on its commitment to the Common Core. In fact, there were several bills that were introduced in different legislative sessions the last couple of months. As this map shows, in virtually all those places, that legislation failed and legislators and governors decided to move forward. And as my prior slide showed, again, nearly every state still remains committed to the Common Core. Just the exceptions I'd flag here, Oklahoma definitively did decide it wanted nothing to do with the Common Core. Indiana's a little bit more of a gray area. It did decide not to go with the Common Core any longer. It convened groups of educators to take a fresh look at standards and re-adopt the standards. And most observers believe that when they look at those new standards in Indiana, they're actually not all that different from the Common Core. Meanwhile, Missouri, South Carolina, and North Carolina aren't doing away with the Common Core, but they will also be convening groups of educators this year or next year to take a fresh look at the standards and decide are all the skills and knowledge in there the right ones. And so there too we might see a little bit of changes around the edges, but I think in those 3 states Even if they're not called the Common Core moving forward, I think most folks feel that substantially we're going to have the standards in those 3 states that match the Common Core. So again, kind of moving forward, we have not just a critical mass, but really most of the country still moving forward with the idea of Common Core standards and common standards. Now when we talk about the standards, we often talk about the instructional shifts in the standards. These are the way that the standards are purposely designed to shift or to nudge or to push classroom instruction in new directions to make sure it's really aligned with college and career readiness expectations. So in English language arts, there's 3 instructional shifts, kind of 3 big ideas for how the standards are different from what has been taking place in a lot of classrooms. And there are 3 big shifts on the math side. For example, one of the shifts you may have heard in English language arts is that students will be expected to use evidence a lot more in their writing, use evidence from text a lot more in their writings. That's an expectation in the workplace and in colleges that has been under-attended to in schools, and so that's a big shift reflected in the standards. And just as there are instructional shifts that the standards imply, there's also shifts in assessment. High-quality standards, like the Common Core, call for high-quality assessments. When you have standards that focus a lot more on writing and problem solving and critical thinking, you need assessments that focus a lot more on critical thinking and problem solving and writing. And when you have standards that really represent college and career ready expectations, you need assessments that really reflect those expectations. As states have been then trying to figure out their next steps and how they will move forward putting in place these new high quality assessments, I just wanted to briefly flag this resource from the Council of Chief State School Officers. CCSSO, of course, is the network of state commissioners of education or heads of state departments of education. It's put together this terrific document consulting with its members and assessment experts that really lays out what are the criteria states should be worried about as they think about making the shift to new assessments. It's a great document for sort of laying out, here are the real priority things to be looking for. We can talk some more about how states have used this document in their decision making or RFPs or what it might mean for funders if you're interested during the Q&A period. But most importantly there in the last bullet is just some information about how to go and find this document yourself. The other thing to flag with Common Core assessments, of course, is that we have 2 state-led consortia that have been working with groups or networks of states to develop a next generation of assessments for states and schools and teachers to be using. Sort of supercharged by a competitive grant process from the federal government a couple of years ago. We now have 2 assessment consortia, of course, that won that competition. The Partnership for Readiness for College and Careers, which we all fondly call PARCC, and the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia. And I think it's important to note here that while the federal government kind of helped kickstart the work of these 2 networks of states, these 2 consortia are really state-governed and state-led and make all the decisions based on what their member states want to do. And ultimately, their success is dependent on these states continuing to be involved and use their products. And so that gets us to a snapshot of what the current school year looks like as we look at this fall. I know for some of you on the phone, school's already started. For those of us in the Northwest, I think school starts next week. But this map kind of shows you what to expect in your states this coming fall. The white states are the states that are still sort of undecided. They're not quite sure what sort of an assessment package they want to use. The orange states show you states that are committed to using Smarter Balanced for all of their students this coming school year. The blue states represent those states that are committed to using the PARCC assessments for all of their students this year. And when you tally up all of those students in those states, you end up with just under half the country. So a really substantial portion of the country committed to using these 2 kind of jointly developed products. Just to note on the circles here, the orange dots indicate states that although they don't know what they're going to do this current school year, still remain committed to Smarter Balanced. The blue dots reflect states that, although not quite sure or maybe not using PARCC with all of their students this year, are still really active in the PARCC consortia. So Massachusetts, for example, has given schools a chance this fall to either use the old assessment in the state or to begin transitioning to PARCC. And I think as of today, about 2/3 of the school districts that have chosen one assessment or the other will be using PARCC. So as we shift to presentations from Jackie and from Laura, I just want to leave us with this slide for some food for thought. Obviously we need high quality assessments now that we have high quality standards, but that doesn't mean this transition work is easy. And there's kind of a set of political challenges that policymakers and school district leaders and educators are facing, and a set of implementation challenges. And as we get into our conversation here in the next couple of minutes, I hope we can kind of keep returning to some of the ideas in this slide and start thinking through what can we as funders do together or in our communities to help schools successfully adopt these assessments and move forward to confront these challenges. So with that, let me introduce and turn things over to Laura Slover at PARCC.
And just before Laura jumps in, this is Joanne. Let me just remind and encourage you that you can use the chat function to enter questions that you have for Laura anytime as she's talking, or to put in questions that you just had for Bill about his presentation, and I will be monitoring those and make sure that we get them asked and answered. Laura, over to you.
Okay, great. Joanne, just quickly, tell me if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. So thanks, everyone, and thanks to Bill for a very good overview of the standards and a good overview of the political context. Just a little bit about me. I was a high school English teacher back in the 90s, and I spent a lot of time as a teacher assessing informally and formally what my kids had learned and used that to inform my instruction, what I needed to teach or reteach. So in my experience, as a former teacher, assessment is part of instruction. It's part of good teaching. It's not a break from instruction. It's an integral part of instruction. And I like to preface my remarks with that, just as a reminder that assessment, we're not taking people with their eye off the ball as we talk about assessment. We're really building tools that can help teachers do good work and deep implementation of the standards. So why PARCC? Well, we have three reasons that we think PARCC is a real improvement over current tests. First of all, quality. We believe that high-quality assessments are just as important as high-quality standards. You can't have one without the other, so PARCC and also Smarter Balanced are integral pieces of the implementation agenda for new high-quality, rigorous standards. The tests have been built to faithfully represent what is in the standards. They're not testing something different. They measure, as Bill said, very well, understanding, reasoning, the application of concepts, and writing. Really important. These tests are going to measure writing in every grade. They're aligned to college and career readiness, which means that they're going to give students information about where they are on their pathway to success after high school, which is really important. They're tethered into what matters most. And they're going to use technology smartly, so we can engage students better, give them opportunities to show understanding using some of the tools that they're using in their everyday lives, like drag and drop and equation building, etc. And so we can get results back to students, parents, and teachers quickly before the end of the year. The second reason we think these assessments are better and different is that they've been built by states together. And there's strength in doing this kind of work together because it means you can have a collaborative process drawing from experts across multiple states and the best minds across those states, sharing good ideas and ensuring quality. So every item on the PARCC test was reviewed by hundreds of educators. At least 30 sets of eyes were involved in reading every single item, and across the states, hundreds if not thousands of educators from both K-12 and higher ed have been engaged. We think that's really an important aspect, going back to the first point of quality, but it's also a benefit of working together on this program. Third, the tools that we are developing include both end-of-year tests, which is probably what you've heard about and what you know most about, but also diagnostic tools and formative assessments that allow for teachers to check understanding throughout the school year in order to help guide instruction. And I'm going to switch in a moment to a slide that shows us that, but the point here is that we've got engaging tools built by a collaborative effort across states that are going to develop high-quality tests. And the bottom line is that this means that we don't need test prep anymore that is somehow separate from or different from classroom instruction. The best way to prepare for these assessments is really to do good instruction and to teach the standards. So here's an overview of the PARCC assessment system. You'll hear me and probably Jackie talk about these assessments as systems. They're a group of tests or tools and sample problems and diagnostics that work together to provide information to support classroom teachers. Many of them are optional. You'll see at the top of the screen there are components in blue, the diagnostic assessments, mid-year and interim assessments, and a speaking and listening assessment, and some formative tools for the earliest learners in kindergarten and first grade that are optional. Teachers are very excited about these new tools and are actually helping build them, but they're designed essentially to give information to teachers in the classroom about where their students are in mastering content. They're aligned to the standards and they're aligned to the end-of-year tests, but they are optional and they're not summative in nature, so they can be giving information on a kind of as-needed basis. The tools in the purple at the end are the two components of the end-of-year assessment, the performance-based assessment and the end-of-year assessment. And the performance-based assessment really does the kinds of things that are different about the standards that Bill was referring to, measuring writing, measuring multi-step problems, and having students show their work and justify their responses. Work is underway on all those tools. We're on time, on schedule, and ready to go for the first year of administration, which we entered into, and my daughter actually started school yesterday here in DC. So we are well underway into the 14-15 school year. So this slide is a very brief slide that just shows who PARCC is. PARCC is a group of states. The assessments, as I said, were developed by a consortium of states. We're a group that is governed by chief state school officers from each of the member states. My organization, PARCC Inc., is the project management partner of the states who are working on PARCC, and on every major policy decisions, the state leaders and only the state leaders make those decisions. PARCC Inc. was formed actually as a nonprofit just this year to help the states transition from the grant period that Bill was talking about, which formally ends this September, to a post-grant sustainable future that can support them as they move from development into implementation. Since PARCC states first came together in early 2010, they have led and continue to lead the development of the assessments. And as I said, state chiefs sit on the governing board. State assessment directors and higher education leaders, as well as teachers and others from across the states, have helped shape the work. Hundreds of educators have been involved in over 1,200 meetings, calls, workshops, etc. I'm not going to do a too deep dive in that other than to say this has been a cast of literally thousands working to develop this program with input from educators, researchers, state and local policymakers, and community groups in every one of the states. This is not an off-the-shelf assessment. It's really a custom-built assessment system from within these states. So Bill alluded to the political pushback, and if you hear a politician say, we don't want a test that was created by others, we want a homegrown test. Well, you can say with confidence that PARCC is developed by people within the states. It's an assessment system built by educators and experts in their states, field tested in each of the states, and with tools and supports and diagnostic pieces also built by the states. This is not some for-profit venture. This is really a state-driven and state-developed entity. And there are huge benefits for doing that. Every state retains complete control of its curriculum, its student data, its assessment, decisions about when and how to use the assessments for accountability purposes. So each individual state gets decision-making authority, but they've also been able to benefit from the collective best thinking of experts from across the states. So I want to dive into a little bit of specific example about why PARCC is a different kind of test from some of the tests that you might be more familiar with. As I said, the states have been working on this design, and there have been a lot of changes to the kinds of ways, for example, that we assess English language arts. Bill talked about using evidence to support claims. He talked about doing original writing. That's exactly the kind of item you'll see on the PARCC test. So let me show you this example, which is not a PARCC item. This comes from a test that was pre-PARCC and pre-Common Core. This is from a 10th grade English language arts test, and it's fairly typical of the kind of items that you might see, and certainly when I was a high school teacher, this is almost verbatim the kind of task students were asked to write. It says the cafeteria supervisor in your school is considering adding new healthier options to the school lunch menu, and then it asks students to write a letter to the supervisor suggesting at least 3 new additions to the menu. It has some value. It actually asks students to write, which is more than is the case in some states. You have to put together a logical response and make an argument, and in theory back it up. But the problem is that it doesn't ask students to actually use evidence from text, and they can answer the question, in fact, not referring to evidence or backing up their claims. So here's an example of a quite different item, an item that is an example from an 11th grade PARCC sample. So the previous version was a 10th grade item. This is an 11th grade item, and you'll see it's quite different. In this passage, the item asks students to read 3 sources: the Declaration of Independence, the passage from Patrick Henry's speech, and a video. And it asks students to present an important idea presented in the sources involves the colonist notion of the purpose of government. Write an essay in which you explore the perceptions of government presented in the sources. And then it asks students to use evidence and to back up their point. So this is pretty different. They're reading 2 things and watching and citing evidence in support of an argument about the notion of government. Quite different from what you saw before. It really asks kids to summarize, analyze, and draw on the passages that they've read. It's very much in keeping with preparation for college, in which a college professor would assign writing that asks students to draw on several texts and will prepare them from the kind of work they have to do when they get there. A mathematics item. So here's a mathematics item. I chose a grade 4 item, and this is a fairly typical item from a grade 4 test before Common Core, where a student is asked to identify which fraction of these stickers are hearts and which of the numbers represents the whole set of stickers. You've got to divide the number of hearts by the number of stickers. It's a fractions and ratio problem. It's a very important concept, but you'll notice the focus on procedure only. It's counting, and it's pretty static. It's a pencil and paper item. So now take a look at a PARCC item, and we're doing a static view of what's actually a computer-based item, where students would actually get to click through this and plot points on a number line. This item comes in 3 parts. Part A, which you see here, asks students to demonstrate that they know a fraction is a number rather than a ratio, which puts the focus on understanding immediately. They're not just regurgitating or doing a division problem. They're actually understanding the concept. And then you'll notice that students have to actually interact with the problem by placing fractions on the number line, which engages students. And most of the PARCC items that are online have a technology-enhanced function like this, another number line or graphing, etc., which helps students make sense of the concept by actually asking them to do something. In Part B, students are asked to make sense of the fractions as numbers. Here they're asked to, if 3/2 is greater than or less than 5/6, and to explain how they know. So they have to compare them. They have to take a step beyond putting them on the number line, which you saw on the previous screen. And they have to either use the number line or procedures to show that 3/2 is bigger than 5/6. And then lastly, a Part C, so you can see how this item evolves and builds. Students here finally apply their understanding by creating a fraction, a new fraction that's between 3/2 and 5/6. So this task has increased in rigor. Students have done more than just regurgitate a formula. They've actually done the procedure, demonstrated understanding, and applied that understanding. And then in the final part, they're asked to explain. So this is 4th grade. It's a pretty comprehensive task, and it gives students at all levels an opportunity to show what they know. And it mirrors good instruction. We have math teachers from around the country who say this is the kind of task that will actually allow us to focus on good teaching and support that good teaching in our classrooms. So I went through rather quickly those 2 items. I'm happy to answer more questions about items, and I direct you to the PARCC online website where there are numerous sample items, and people are using those as really good instructional professional development. So what's happening in your community? I thought it would be helpful to take a step back and talk about What are the kinds of things that are happening? As I said earlier, teachers are deeply engaged in this work. As we move into the first year of implementation, the PARCC states each have dozens of educators working together as part of an educator network. Nearly 400 or 500 of them gather every year for professional development, and many times a year by phone or by email via webinar to share what they've learned, to collaborate on new solutions. In some cases, states have created their own networks of educators who are deeply engaged in understanding and advocating and training others about the new standards and assessments. This is an area where I'd love to pursue more with you, where there's an opportunity to support these educators who are doing this important work. Hundreds of educators, as I mentioned, are participating in reviewing test items and the tools that are under development and helping train others in how to use those. That's another option for really getting engaged. Let me give you a couple examples. In New Jersey earlier this month, the Teacher Network hosted its second statewide teacher leader conference. And the conference drew hundreds of teachers from around the state who collaborated during workshops that focused on how to use the PARCC tools to continue with implementation of the Common Core in their classrooms this year and help to transition to the new assessments. Teachers had a chance to share their own resources and practice and talk with teachers across the state about their experiences. So that's an example of where in-state network is really making hay out of the tools that PARCC has developed, and they've continued to build new resources and share them with each other. Higher education is another place where there's been a lot of good work done. Faculty at community colleges and university systems from across the states are engaged in the work, serving as item reviewers, and also getting involved in thinking about how the PARCC tools can serve as an indicator of college readiness, so that when students graduate from high school, they know whether they've scored at an appropriate level to be placed directly into a credit-bearing course or whether they need remediation. There's nothing worse than students graduating from high school thinking they're prepared for college-level work and finding they are not. And so PARCC has worked very hard with higher ed institutions from across the states to build an understanding of and build towards an acceptance of the use of PARCC assessments to indicate readiness for credit-bearing courses. Happy to talk further about that as well. It's really a hallmark of this work is the collaboration between higher ed and K-12. As we move into this first implementation year, I want to share the good news that we had a very successful field test in the spring. So we're coming off of a very positive experience in testing over 1 million kids in 16,000 schools in 14 states plus the District of Columbia. It went very well. 75% of those kids actually took this assessment on the computer, which for many of them was new. It was the first time they'd done that. Some states have been doing this for a while, but many have not. So 75% tested it out on the computer, 25% took pencil and paper versions. And the purpose of the field test essentially is to test out the test items, to see how they perform, to see how well kids did on them, to see how long kids took to do the items, and very importantly, to test out the technology platform. So overall, things went very well. We were very pleased. Both PARCC and Smarter Balanced had quite successful field tests. The technology system worked phenomenally well. There were minor glitches that had to do with password resets and sometimes people getting logged off in the middle of a test session, but overall they were resolved quite quickly and states had very few problems. Schools benefited from conducting this quote-unquote dress rehearsal because they're now prepared, and those that were prepared in advance had fewer issues around technology and ended up being very successful. The sample questions and tutorials have been set up prior to the field test and are going to be expanded on this fall. And the test administration manuals, which we tried out last spring, needed some work actually, and so we're going to be spending this fall fixing those and getting ready for next year. So the next slide really shows some quotes, which I won't read to you, but you'll have access to these after the webinar, and it just shows the very good feedback that we got. And I'll show one quote from a student on the top left, which said, "I like this test so much more than blank state test because it makes you think. And when we heard that and other feedback like that, it really signaled to us that we had gotten it right. These tests are supposed to be learning experiences that not just have kids regurgitate things, but actually help them think and challenge them to learn new content. So final words. What can you do? I've shared some information with you, and we are poised on this first year of implementation, and we are technically ready to go. We are ready to go in terms of the development cycle. We're on track, but we need help. We need help from you all to help tell the story and dispel the myths and understandings that Bill alluded to. We're in a very tough political environment, and we need a lot of people pulling in the same direction and talking about the real facts, the facts that these were state-developed, state-driven, and high quality. We'd love you to invite us to meet with opinion leaders in your states. And that's my alarm going off, so I need to wrap up. Because we know that when opinion leaders and parents get good information from that are based in fact, and when someone actually explains how teachers are using the assessment results to improve teaching and learning for their children, they get that and they support the effort. We've sat down with state legislators and shared sample items, and the light bulb goes off and they get really excited about this, and they realize that this isn't just about a hammer, it's really about empowering teachers and students and parents with good information. In terms of investment, we have a couple of key ways we think those of you who are looking for ways to support could get involved, particularly around helping build out the educator networks in your states that I talked about, and helping develop state and community-specific communications tools that can inform specific audiences like parents, business leaders, and the community members in your states. And then finally, as I mentioned briefly, there is a large effort with higher ed to engage higher ed faculty and leadership, particularly at 2- and 4-year public institutions, and we'd welcome any support there as well. Here's some ways to follow up with me and to look on the website to find more information and try out a practice test. We saw a great example of a newspaper actually in Louisiana providing opportunities for their public to try out a practice item every week. And it was a great way of engaging the public. So I will wrap it up there and turn it back over to Joanne, and I know Jackie is going to do a deep dive on Smarter Balanced.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie King from Smarter Balanced. Over to you, Jackie.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. Joanne, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. So let me walk you through what we're going to talk about today with regard to Smarter Balanced. I'm going to try my best not to repeat too much of what Laura has already covered, so we can get to questions and conversation. I'm going to say a little bit more about why new assessments are important and why the assessments that PARCC and Smarter Balanced are building are important improvements over assessments of the past. I'm going to provide you with an overview of the Smarter Balanced assessment system, including showing you a couple of sample items. Talk more about how you can help the Smarter Balanced states and schools and communities in those states as they move towards implementing the new assessment system, and then end with some ways that you can stay engaged with the consortium. So if we think about the role of assessment, it's really part of an integrated system that starts with standards, then curricula built upon those standards, instruction based on those curricula, and assessment. And assessment really provides for that ongoing feedback loop so that teachers and school leaders and parents can know how well students are progressing. So it informs instruction, it monitors progress, it helps schools and eventually, in our case, and in the case of PARCC colleges, place students into appropriate courses. And lastly, it provides accountability so that the public and policymakers can know how our schools are doing. We tend to get focused very much on that last bullet around accountability, but really it's the first three that are of primary importance within schools and in terms of changing student performance. That's really where we where assessment helps us move the needle on student achievement, which is the goal that we're all after. Just a little bit on the benefits of new assessments and how these assessments, both Smarter Balanced and PARCC, are different than assessments of the past. Typically with state testing systems linked to No Child Left Behind, there really hasn't been a lot in it of personal importance to students. The tests were very important to schools and to teachers because they were about accountability. And parents look forward to seeing the results to get a sense of how their students were doing. But for the individual student, there really weren't a lot of stakes associated with these assessments. They didn't really mean much to them. By working with higher ed, and as Laura said, both consortia are bringing in college faculty to help develop these assessments. By linking with higher ed, we want to provide some tangible skin in the game, essentially, for students. That if they do well on these assessments, if they master these standards, this isn't just something that is good for them while they're in K-12 schools. This is going to affect their success after they leave school. And colleges recognizing these assessments and using them to exempt students from developmental coursework, non-credit remedial coursework, and to let students know that if they're admitted, they can be placed directly into credit-bearing courses. That affirms for the students and their parents that these standards really matter. These aren't just something that's within the four walls of the school building. This is about preparing them for success out there in life after high school. So that connection to college and careers, that tangible signal to students that these standards matter, that achieving the mastery of the knowledge and skills embodied in the Common Core is crucial for their success after high school is a really important element of these assessments that was not present in the state assessments that we've known in all but a very small number of states. Laura's talked about increased rigor and accountability, that we're measuring the full array of challenging skills that the Common Core requires, such as critical thinking, solving complex real-world problems, writing logically and persuasively, using evidence from sources, etc. So really, really important that these assessments have been built from the ground up to measure the full array of standards, not only those standards that are easily assessed with traditional multiple choice questions. It's why we've had to really expand the repertoire of assessment techniques that we're using, because for much of the Common Core, you really can't measure it effectively with kind of the old style fill in the blank or bubble in questions. Comparability and continuity. So important that these results cross state lines, that if a student is moving from one state to another, they can have a common yardstick to measure their achievement and their growth. And that will be the case within the consortia, and we are also working hard across the consortia so that at least at that level of grade level standards, students can understand if they move from a Smarter Balanced state to a PARCC state or vice versa, how their scores compare. That's important for families that are so mobile. It's also really important for policymakers and for the business community who are really tired of trying to scratch their head over how these assessment results compare from one state to another. Other important thing is continuity. These assessments are being built so that we can measure student growth over time, and parents and teachers can track student progress from year to year. So a vertical scale that allows for that measurement of growth is really important. Laura's talked a lot about quality. I won't belabor that point. We've also had hundreds, if not thousands, of educators involved in building these assessments and managing them. Laura's also talked about state governance. This is completely state-led. These are built by states for states. Something Laura didn't mention, I don't think, is cost. By pooling our expertise and pooling our resources and taking advantage, quite frankly, of the grants that both consortia received from the federal government, we're able to offer a level of quality at a cost point that is below what most of our states are currently paying. And that's really saying something because we're assessing writing in both consortia at every grade. And in many states they weren't assessing writing at all, or certainly not at every grade. And that's really the big cost driver, because at this point that still needs to be graded by hand by educators or other trained staff. So that's a big cost driver. And then the last thing I'd mention is transparency and external scrutiny. We have made all of our design documents publicly available on our website. We've made hundreds of sample items available in full practice tests and in standalone sample items. So educators, curriculum developers, anybody out there with an interest can know just what we're doing in terms of building these assessments and what they're going to look like. That's something that a commercial test publisher would never do. These would be considered trade secrets. But in our case, it's fully transparent. Even the software that we have developed for the Smarter Balanced assessments, it's all open source software. So anyone can, any software developer can take our code and develop products that will implement the Smarter Balanced assessments, or hopefully, that their developers will come up with new innovations that may be useful to states around the country. So big differences here between the kinds of assessments that have been used in your states and what these new assessments are offering. I saw that a question came in on the chat about the federal support for the consortia's work. So both of these consortia, PARCC and Smarter Balanced, were funded by a federal grant program offered through the Race to the Top assessment program. In both cases, we received roughly $175 million to support the research and development for these assessments. Now, going forward, the Smarter Balanced will be completely funded by its member states. So the ongoing administration and continued R&D is funded by the states themselves, but the initial development of these assessments was funded through that substantial federal grant. This is an overview of the Smarter Balanced assessment system. The summative assessment is the end of year. That's what will be available this spring. But two tools that are really important for supporting learning in the classroom are the digital library. That's actually in a preview. Teachers are using that now in states across the consortium. It will become available to subscribing states October 1st. But that is a tool with over 1,500 instructional resources, professional development materials, all aligned to the Common Core and geared around the use of the formative assessment process in classrooms. And it's been really exciting to see teacher reactions to this tool. It's a very exciting new resource for teachers to be able to dive into a library of materials selected by their peers, screened for quality by their peers, that they can start implementing in their classrooms right away. The interim assessments will be rolling out beginning this fall. Those are optional mid-year assessments that will allow schools to check student progress and provide information for teachers to support instruction. I'm going to skip over this slide in the interest of time. This gives you some more information on the digital library in case you're interested in that. Wanted to show you just quickly a couple of sample items. This is a grade 4 mathematics item. Prior to the Common Core, students often had to wait until 8th grade or even high school to hear that multiplication and division are inverse operations. With the Common Core operations, young students are asked to understand the relationship between addition and subtraction, and similarly between multiplication and division. This problem, students are asked to choose all the equations that represent the problem, which requires students to both understand and interpret the relationship between multiplication and division in the context of a word problem. Past assessments have often tried to look at multiplication and division as separate skills. This is an example of where the Smarter Balanced assessments highlight the relationship between the operations and support the knowledge and skills that students will need for later study of algebra. Here's an example of a grade 11 English item. This item asks students to evaluate the credibility of sources in order to select relevant information for a proposed report. It was developed to mirror an authentic research process. Students are given a research plan and results from an internet search, and then asked to choose which source would most likely have credible and relevant information. So one of the elements of the English Language Arts Standards is research, and this is an item that goes directly to assessing students' research skills, just the kind of thing that these 11th graders will have to do when they get to college. This is continuing in the same item. This is this is a different item. This is a writing item that asks students to actually pose a counter argument, drawing from evidence from an array of sources. This is another, similar to the item that Laura showed, this is an item that asks students to demonstrate their ability to use relevant evidence from research notes to write a valid argument. This is a timeline of where we are on the assessment development process. Like PARCC, we had a field test this spring. That followed up on a pilot test in spring 2013 with about 650,000 students, and then cognitive labs and small-scale trials prior to that. We will be setting achievement levels for the assessment in October of this year. Those are the cut scores in common parlance that will define the 4 achievement levels on the Smarter Balanced assessment. I've already mentioned to you the rollout of the other elements of the assessment system. Let me give you a brief overview of our field test. It was, like PARCC's, very successful. The field test had participants 4.2 million students. It was the largest online assessment ever given in the United States in K-12 education. So really quite a massive undertaking. We had 5 states that tested all of their students, including California. So the numbers were really quite extraordinary. I think we had very similar findings to PARCC. We have done some revisions to our test administration manual and user guides to improve their clarity. We recognize that managing test security in this age of social media is a significant challenge. I think that was a big learning experience for our member states. That really goes beyond our assessments. That would be any assessment, but that's just the world of smartphones that we live in. We'll be producing a longer paper this fall that really goes deeply into the lessons that we've learned from our field test. These are some quotes from teachers and students on the field test. I do want to highlight the one on the upper left because it really gets at something that Laura mentioned earlier, that this is the end of test prep. If you build assessments that are linked directly to your standards, then you teach what you need to teach and the students will do fine. So this teacher said, if we ask students to read critically, to analyze text, to write about their reading across the year, then they will be prepared for these tasks, which is absolutely what we are striving for. Here's some ideas on how you can help as leaders in your community. You can help by making the case for high quality aligned assessment. These are not interchangeable widgets. Which tests a state uses really does matter for the ultimate success of the standards and of efforts in the schools to improve. Also, since we'll be having score reports come out this coming spring with the new achievement levels that we are creating, in many states that's going to mean that test scores look lower than they did in the past. The proportion of students who meet the grade level standards is likely to decline in most states, and in some states to decline substantially. Doesn't mean the kids are doing any worse. It means that we're holding them to higher standards. And as leaders in your community, any efforts you can make to help put that in context and explain to your communities that this is the first step and a really important step in making change, that we can't solve problems if we're not willing to look them in the face. And so these score reports should not be the source of panic, but they should be the source of resolve to improve. And as funders, there's so many different areas at the state, regional, or local level where your efforts would be welcome. Many states are still trying to upgrade their technology infrastructure. States are still engaged in professional development activities. They need help with developing additional instructional resources, new curricula and courses, counseling and advising. We've been so focused on Common Core and teachers, but there's a huge role for those in and out of schools who advise students on their post-secondary options to help them understand these new standards and these new test results and what they mean for students moving on into post-secondary education or further career education. So there's a whole body of work there for high school guidance counselors, but also for the many organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and local community groups that provide counseling and support to high school students. And then lastly, there will be a significant need for research and evaluation. So all areas of potential funding. And I'm going to wrap up by just pointing out a few ways that you can stay engaged with Smarter Balanced. Of course, at our website, it includes practice tests at each grade. And for both content areas, so that's a great way to familiarize yourself with how these assessments will be different. We have a bi-monthly newsletter that you can sign up for at the website. Great way to stay up to date on the latest news about Smarter Balanced. And then, of course, we're active on Twitter, and that gives you day-to-day information on the consortia and what we're up to. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you, Jackie. Actually, we just got a question for you. I'm just going to ask you to take 2 more seconds to answer it. The question is, does Smarter Balanced have any talking points around messaging the transition to the more rigorous assessment in anticipation of student achievement drops?
Yeah, we absolutely do, and I'd be happy to share those with you. So I will provide those to GFE so that they can go out with the materials from this webinar. I think the main point to emphasize is that we have a new baseline established with these assessments, that we are holding students to a more rigorous standard aligned to college readiness, and that it's going to take a while for teachers and schools to catch up to that. But that's okay. That we're at the beginning of that process. So I think the big takeaway is to help communities to understand that, to not feel like they need to hit the panic button, and to not feel like, well, we're worried about the temperature, so maybe we should throw out the thermometer. We need to stick with this and look these results in the face, analyze them, and respond to them appropriately.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just tell you guys what we're thinking of doing right now. I want to just ask a couple of quick questions myself to Laura and to Jackie. But one thing that I would love is, I think all of you have a raise your hand button. What I'd love to see is just sort of a show of hands. I can see how many of you have raised your hands, and I can see who's got questions, to just see whether there are people who have questions that you'd like to directly ask to Jackie or Laura or Bill. And just so I can make sure that I leave appropriate time at the end for that. And while you stew over the question of whether you have a question, let me turn first to Laura and just say, like, what are the big challenges that you are anticipating coming down the pike at everybody in the coming few months as we start transitioning to real operational assessments here?
Thanks, Joanne. I think there are two major challenges as we go into this year, and one is technical and one is political. The technical challenge is getting everybody ready for online assessments. While PARCC is developing and offering a paper and pencil version of the test, and a number of states are going to utilize that version, many states and many districts are ready and moving forward bravely into the technology delivered assessment, the computer-based test, because that's the 21st century technology we have, and it offers a number of really important possibilities. One, the kind of technology-enhanced items that are more engaging and, frankly, more fun for kids, and allow them different opportunities to show what they can do. It is cheaper and will, over time, save states a lot of money. And third, it's faster to score computer-based assessments, so teachers can get results back before the end of the year. So for a lot of reasons, technology is important to do, but it's a transition, and making sure people are ready in both devices and bandwidth and infrastructure is not an insignificant challenge. The other, I would say, to this group is just political. There are legislators and governors, as we speak, who are putting up roadblocks for implementation coming into this first year of assessment, even though teachers have been diligently and effectively implementing for 4 years. All of a sudden there's incredible pushback as we move into a political season that is both midterm elections and the presidential race. That is really, it's too bad, it's sad for kids, but it's also a challenge for both consortia, I think, particularly PARCC, which has a lot of red states, and we are working hard to make sure that facts and not fiction are driving the conversations.
Yeah, and Laura, I think is it fair to say that maybe the ask you have of the folks on the phone is for people who are in particular, who are sort of deeply enmeshed in particular local communities and areas, to not be scared to use your voice to help make sure that it's facts that are getting out there and not the myth?
I think that's right, Joanne, and I would invite anyone to follow up with us to, we can provide specific information and talking points, or we can hook you up with the educator leaders in your states who are great advocates and spokesperson people for this work. Sometimes it's helpful to have someone from PARCC Central, and sometimes it's really not, and it's better to have voices from the states who have been in the development seat from the beginning. So we are ready to support, and just are relying on people to let us know where help is needed.
Okay, Jackie, let me ask you the same question, because with some of the things that you've got coming over the next few months, you've actually got some different challenges, or maybe some additional challenges.
Sure. So I think some of our challenges are also operational. The transition has already begun. As our federal grant winds down, our federal grant will end at the end of this calendar year. We are transitioning to become a program within the Graduate School of Education at UCLA. So we are going to have new employers and a new structure under which we're working. So we've got some operational challenges just internally as an organization in making that transition, although we're really excited about the resources and support that UCLA is already offering to us. So it's exciting, but it's challenging. We're also rolling out our whole assessment system this year. So the digital library is available now. Our interim assessments will be rolling out this year, and then we'll have all of our states implementing the summative assessment this spring. So just helping states over those hurdles of implementing the new assessments is a big deal, especially in those states that did not test all their students in the field test. I think for the states that did that, they're so glad that they did because they really were able to learn a lot and really lower the worry and the anxiety in their schools by doing that. I think the states that did not take advantage of that, they have a bigger hill to climb for this coming year, and we'll be working with them to do that. So I think we've got those operational challenges, but I think we also definitely have the political challenges as well. We've got some states with governors up for re-election and states where there's going to be new chief state school officers. We're going to be setting these new performance levels and then almost just a couple of days after the election. So the confluence of those leadership changes in states and the fact that we're really going to be confronting the fact that these assessments are more rigorous, they're more challenging, and at least initially in a lot of our communities we're not going to see the kinds of results that we have been used to with 70–80% of the students being judged as meeting grade level standards. So that's going to be a big change for our states.
And maybe just to flag for everybody that PARCC and Smarter Balanced are handling this question of setting cut scores very differently. So Smarter Balanced, as Jackie said, is setting their cut scores in November, which means that when students take the assessment next spring, they'll know very quickly, right, Jackie, what their scores are like, whereas PARCC is setting them after the operational tests have been given, and so students won't know what their test scores were for a while. Do you guys just want to talk for a second about the timing of those two things, just so everybody's clear about what's going to happen when in different types of states?
Sure. So I can start in the Smarter Balanced states. When they get their score reports, which we anticipate will be about 2 weeks after assessment is complete, they will see on their score report which achievement level they have scored in. So students will see a scale score, a number, but then they'll also see which achievement level that number falls into. And we have up on our website our sample reports that you can take a look at. Each state will make a decision about whether or not they want to use our developed reports or design their own reports. But we think for many states they will go ahead and use the Smarter Balanced designed reports, so you can get a better sense of what that will look like directly on our website.
And just to get out of assessment lingo, can you just say what achievement level, like give examples of what achievement levels are, what that means?
Sure. So for example, I just got test results back from my son who's a 4th grader in Maryland. And there were 3 achievement levels on his existing state test, basic, proficient, and advanced. And the score report said if he scored between, I'm going to make up the number.
Oh, that's fine. I just wanted,
100 and 200 is basic, 200 and 300 is proficient, and 300 and above is advanced, for example. That's what we mean by an achievement level. It's a group of scores, it's a band of scores, and it's a way of breaking up the continuum of student performance into groups. So folks on the call might be familiar with NAEP, what we call the Nation's Report Card, and when NAEP results come out, we see X percentage of students scored at the proficient level, for example.
Okay, great. And Laura, just really quickly, because we're running out of time, what's the timing like for when students will get their test score results back from PARCC in 2014, and then what does it look like in the following years?
Okay, really quickly, PARCC is going to be doing what Jackie talked about. next summer. So right about now, we will be embedded in the standard setting process. We've already launched a year-long process using evidence and data, both from the field tests and from the operational tests, and judgments of higher ed faculty and K-12 teachers and community members. And so we're embarking on a process for that. In the first year, we'll be setting standards based on the results of the actual Spring 15 assessment. And so those results will come out in the early fall, September. Following that first year, results will come back before the end of the school year in each year. So there's a delay, if you will, in the first year during standard setting, and after that, the goal is to get results back really quickly so they can inform teachers before they go home for the summer.
Great, thank you. Let me just ask one really quick question that Lauren Dax wanted to know. She wondered what dollars are being forecasted for next year, like based on states' experience with the pilot test. Do they have a good sense of how much it's going to cost them next year to give assessments?
Sure. We actually put out our price estimates, 2 years ago now, and those have not changed. If a state is implementing only the end-of-year summative assessment, we anticipate that their full cost to do that will be $22.50 a student. That includes a membership fee to Smarter Balanced of $6 and change per student, with the rest of it being state costs for test administration. If they implement the full system with the digital library and the interim assessments, the total cost goes up to $27.30.
Thank you. Thank you. So I saw that the only question that we had was from Annette, and Annette has unraised her hand. So Annette, if you still have a question, feel free to type it into the chat window, and we'll ask it that way just for expediency's sake, because we are coming down the home stretch. And while Annette types in her question, I just want to take a couple of seconds to just reflect a little bit on the things that we've heard from PARCC and Smarter Balanced, and then I will answer Annette's question and turn it back over to Lisa for a quick wrap-up. So I just want to talk for a minute about the role that philanthropy has, and particularly local philanthropies, in helping to support what's happening in their schools and districts. One of the things that I think we're seeing is that the states that have a really strong network of philanthropic engagement are doing a really good job of educating their legislators, working with teachers, helping empower teacher voice around these kinds of questions, and in general having a huge impact in their states on getting the right information out there through the right messengers to help the assessments and the standards sort of focus away from the politics and back on the implementation. So I want to thank those of you who've been involved in those efforts and urge others, if you want to get involved, to definitely get in touch with Education First and Bill Porter, because I think he's got a bunch of resources and different things that might be able to help you. And really thank Jackie and Laura for their time. There was one final question that Annette asked, which is, are there targeted efforts to help English learners during this transition? And let me just turn it over for a 1-minute answer to you, Jackie, and then we'll turn it back to Lisa for a quick wrap.
So there definitely are targeted efforts in schools instructionally. There's also a lot of ways that the assessment supports English language learners. One of the exciting things about assessing using computers is that you can do so much more in the area of language supports. The Smarter Balanced assessment offers students access to glossaries built into the assessments for 10 languages and 4 dialects. So students can mouse over a word that they don't know and see it pop up on their screen, translated into their first language with multiple translations into dialects as needed. So things like that just never would have been available with paper and pencil tests. A very exciting element of moving to online assessment.
Thank you. Let me just turn it back over to you, Lisa, for a quick wrap-up.
Thanks so much, Joanne, and thank you to Joanne for her excellent moderation and to all of our other speakers today. Extremely informative. I just want to invite you, if you had questions that didn't get answered or you didn't present or would like to get answered, please just email programs@edfunders.org and we'll make sure to get those questions out to folks. You will be receiving an email today with a link, or either today or early tomorrow morning, with a link to the webinar itself. We welcome you to disseminate that to other folks. And you will also right away after this webinar be receiving an evaluation. Please take that. It helps us improve our programs. Thanks, everyone.